Yeah. Well, after sweatpants and compassion, we're making an abrupt turn, it feels like. So the passage I want us to look at today doesn't feel like it fits any of that. I don't even know if it fits where our heads and hearts are today. And so you will tell me if it doesn't. So before it's I have it on a PowerPoint, so I'll put it up here in just a second. But while I'm messing with that, sort of any lingering comments, questions, reflections you've had bouncing around in you as we move through Lent about Mark's gospel, about your own Lenten season, anything there? I want to give you space to voice that, if so.
I just think Mark's gospel is absolutely loaded.
Mhm.
Loaded in what sense, Diana?
I mean, the miracles, what he commands of us. I think we could spend years studying Mark.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It is the shortest of our gospels, and it moves along at a pretty good pace. So in a way, it feels like you don't get a lot of time to breathe. It's just like this, then this, then this, then this. So it jumps along at a pretty good pace. Matthew and Luke linger a little more with a little bit more detail in some places, and so it can feel a bit more spacious. Mark's very sort of rat-a-tat action focused. And so it's interesting the way that, the way we as readers and listeners kind of respond to those things. Yeah. Well, we're just landing in a few little places in Mark's gospel on these 5 or 6 weeks here that we're able to do this Bible study. And so, we're missing a lot, but I am trying to give just a bit of attention to like the flow and sort of what's happening. And so, so this week we'll take a look at this passage from Mark 12. I don't want to say too much before we read this because I kind of just want to read this together and then just let you sit with it for a minute. We're not going to do the Lectio Divina thing, the multiple readings like we've done before. Just want to read it. And I kind of then just want you to sit with it. And you've heard this before. This isn't new. I just want to hear kind of how it hits you, what questions come to mind. The only thing I'll say before we read this is that we are in the final week of Jesus' life. And so I had mentioned before, in terms of the flow of these Gospels, the weight is really on the end of Jesus' ministry and life, the last week. So, we're getting ready for Palm Sunday here in a few weeks, the triumphal entry when Jesus enters Jerusalem, that final week before he's arrested on Thursday, crucified on Friday. So that's Mark 11, right? So Jesus enters Jerusalem at Mark 11. So, that's a bit more than halfway through, but pretty early in the gospel, we're already in the final week, and there's lots of detail, lots of things going on in the final week. Not so many miracles like Diana was mentioning. Those are more towards the front part of his ministry, but lots of teachings and lots of controversies. So he's entered Jerusalem. If we're reading along with Mark's story, we know that Jesus has been trying to help his disciples, his closest friends, understand that the kind of Messiah he is it's going to be a hard path. He'll be opposed by the powers that be. He'll have opponents, right? They've had a hard time understanding why he is that kind of Messiah. Shouldn't he be more powerful? Shouldn't he be more kingly? Shouldn't he be more in control? Shouldn't he subdue his adversary? Shouldn't he liberate the Jews and give them, on and on, all these expectations of what they wanted him to be, over against his stark warnings about how painful his path will be, ending in betrayal and torture and crucifixion and resurrection, but they can't hear that yet. So he's entered Jerusalem. We're kind of in the final week of confrontation. So the the adversarial relationships between Jesus and the groups that are threatened by him, worried about him, frustrated with him. They're kind of coming to a fevered pitch, right? So I'll say that much just to give you the tone of when we get here. So I'll read this and then we'll just pause for a few minutes. I just want to see what sort of what your reactions are. Then they, so the scribes, the Pharisees, the synagogue rulers from the previous verse. So the Jewish authorities, right? They sent to Jesus some Pharisees and some Herodians. We'll come back to these groups. They sent to him some Pharisees and Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere, that you show deference to no one, for you don't regard people with partiality. You don't show favoritism, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." Okay, that's the setup. Here's the question. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not? Yes, no question, black and white. But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius, the coin, and let me see it." And so they brought one. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this on the coin? Whose title is this?" They answered, "It's Caesar's, it's the emperor." And Jesus said to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. Okay, we can take several runs through this and ask all the questions we want, but on just that first reading on this windy, somewhat warm Tuesday of Lent 2021, right? With all that means, right? At the end of the pandemic, and we're trying to get vaccinated and blah, 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 right? So what interests you? What piques your curiosity? What did you notice on that reading?
Well, right off the bat, I'm a lot more comfortable with this than the liturgy last week in church or Sunday in church, that the wealthy man just walked away.
Right.
Because he couldn't do it. And that, I'm not kidding. That I come home, I talked to Larry about that, and he's like, "I can't sit with this. I couldn't sit with it either." It's like, what do we do with this? What do we do with this? This, I like this one. This is better.
I love it. Thank you.
This is an answer.
No, I love that. And I mean, so we're backing up into Sunday, sort of the Jesus encounter with the rich person.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it that I'm not taking joy in your discomfort, but I love it that you're just registering your discomfort with that story. I hope that my sermon conveyed that too, about where I am. I'm uncomfortable with it. And yeah, so I'll try not to detour us too much right now, but I mean, it's one of the things I love about reading scripture in community and fellowship with other people is that you hear how other people hear it, and you fresh insights and angles from people with different experiences, and that it's okay if we are uncomfortable with parts of it. Like I'd be worried about us if we read it all seamlessly and just acted like we processed it perfectly and our lives are just exactly how we want them to be, and that would be dangerous. So anyway, thank you for the honesty here at the beginning, Tracy. So this is more palatable, or at least doesn't raise as many worries initially. Okay.
Yeah.
The last sentence to me is the way it's worded. It sounds complimentary. Amazed is a positive word, to me it is. And to me, it sounds like that the people that are trying to trap him, end this little episode thinking of him in a positive light, but still it did nothing to change how they treated him on down the road, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the interesting things, and we'll explore this a little bit today as much as we can, sort of we're saying they because the text says they, but we know at least that there's a couple of distinct groups here named, right? The Pharisees, the Herodians, in the just the verse previous it listed chief priests, scribes, and elders, so we've got a lot of people named, and it's a little bit difficult to keep track of who's who and who are his opponents, but you're right, these groups, various groups and people who are his adversaries, they won't be deterred, I guess, whatever this amazement means right here that you're pointing to. Yeah.
I like that because back, I don't know, it was maybe in 5 or 6, they were calling him possessed because they didn't understand. And even his family didn't support him at that point.
Right. So things are coming to a head. There have been misunderstandings all along from his family, from his early disciples, from the crowds, and from all these groups that have power of various sorts, the temple rulers, the synagogue rulers, the Bible teachers. But it's sure intensifying here in this final week. It's almost like one power clash after another this final week. And so one at least gets the sense of, maybe that's why he didn't head to Jerusalem, to the temple area until now, because it flashed really quickly. Yeah. Anything else you want to mention just off the first reading?
I wonder how he decided like where to spend his time, because, clearly these were questions that nobody was sincerely seeking an answer, and it was obvious, but there would have been people all around who had really sincere questions, who sincerely didn't get what he was saying, but wanted to. So with that sense, I would think he had a sense that he didn't have just a ton more time. So with that, if I have just a little bit of time left, how do I decide that I am going to spend time answering? I guess, I don't know. I just wondered about that, how he decided who he talked to.
Mm-hmm. There is certainly a timing angle to this. You get the sense that in the early part of the gospel, Mark is chronicling his village travels throughout Galilee, largely up a little bit north, which is where he's from, where most of his disciples are from. They're, for the most part, small town folks. And then it sort of gathers steam at the top of a hill, and then he heads towards Jerusalem, and things gather speed and intensity. And that's when the warnings, that's when he starts the teaching about, look, I want you all to understand what's going to happen when we get there. And they say, no, that can't happen. No, he's like, I have to help you understand sort of how I'm inhabiting this Messiah role. And it's very different than what you may have thought I would have done, right? And so clearly the timing issue, and Jane, I think you're right. And we don't talk about this much. What was his sense of timing? How did he decide how to allocate his travel, and why did he decide to go to Jerusalem here? It was festival oriented.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, those are great questions. So we're reading Mark, and I suggested to you last couple of weeks that most scholars think Mark was probably the earliest gospel composed and written, and it's most likely that Matthew and Luke had Mark as a source and used him to construct their gospels, and then added to Mark's gospel and rearranged things and reconnected things, put things in different places, added other material that they had, either in oral or written traditions. So all that to say, both Matthew and Luke include this story. And they largely keep it in the same place. It's a confrontation story set in Jerusalem, in the temple area, after Jesus has entered Jerusalem for the final week. Sometimes you see lots of significant changes that Matthew and Luke make to a story, and sometimes that's interesting and telling about what they're up to. I don't know that that's the case here with this passage. The fact that they keep it suggests that it's pretty central to how the earliest Christians reflected on who Jesus is and what it means to be one of his followers. There's another theme that we've been tracking a little bit, that these two questions about who's the Messiah and what does it mean to be a follower of the Messiah, those hang together. When you're answering one, you're starting to answer the other one, and vice versa. So it's an interesting story. They all want to have it there. The only major difference I noticed is that in Luke's gospel, he omits any reference to the Herodians. So he removes them. So, I don't have any insight about why that would be the case, but it is very clear that it was an editorial decision, that I want to tell this story in largely the same way. I want to leave it where it is in the flow of these stories that Mark already has in the final week. But boy, I certainly don't want to specifically mention the Herodians.
Wow.
So that's fascinating to me. I don't know if that says something about Luke's community, his ties, his affiliations, the particular challenges that he was addressing. Now, keep in mind, the events being recounted are something around, early in the century. Mark's gospel, we're getting out to close to 70 AD. Luke's and Matthew's are later, right? So we're not talking journalism here, like on the scene reporting. We're talking about organizing oral and written traditions that have been handed down probably at least a couple of generations, if not more by this point. Let me see if I can't remember if I put this on so one other thing I wanted to mention just about the flow to give us a little momentum. The text that we read is the second of a series of 4 questions put to Jesus by his adversaries. So I thought you might find it interesting. It starts in Mark 11, just after he's entered Jerusalem. Some of his adversaries ask, by what authority are you doing these things? It is a bit of a trick question, a sparked question. Are you claiming to be acting for God? Are you claiming to do this sort of on your own? Then comes this question: is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Again, asked by his opponents. We'll come back and talk about his opponents in a minute. The third question is just a little bit after this, and here you get another group called the Sadducees. So a different sect, of Jews who, if you remember this story, they create a hypothetical scenario. There's a woman, she married a guy, his family apparently had bad heart condition, her husband dies. Next oldest brother feels obligated to marry this woman, so does, but because of the family heart condition, he dies. On down, all 6 brothers, the 7th brother marries her, and he dies, and none of them had any children. So they say, Jesus in the resurrection, right? When God makes everything new, whose wife will she be, right? She's been married to 7 guys. Who gets her in the afterlife, basically. So it's not, so yes, it's problematic, and it's, viewing the woman as the property of men, but bracket that, if you will, just for the moment. There, the question is that the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. And but we'll come back to that and talk about why that might be. But so that was their angle. They thought that Jesus' comments about this coming new kingdom, new world where God makes things new was unnecessary, or rather silly, honestly. And they tried to come up with a hypothetical, kind of like playing debate, where Jesus would have to admit, you're right, it's all kind of crazy. I don't know who would be married to her. And then the 4th question in this series feels different to me. It is asked, I think, by a Pharisee. Can't remember exactly, but it's which commandment is the first of all the commandments? What's the greatest commandment? Then Jesus going on to, he's not stumped at all. He's able to say, it's very clear, love the Lord your God with heart, soul, mind, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. He gives 2. So he has no problem answering the question. The 4th question doesn't seem as fraught with difficulties, but maybe it is, and maybe I'm missing something there about picking and choosing among the Bible, right? The Hebrew Bible, what's the most important parts, but he was able to do that. So anyway, we're in the final week. Jesus is facing a number of confrontational situations where the crowds are around. There are other people. It's a holy place. It's a powerful place near the temple. It's a closely watched place by the Romans. Keep in mind, the Romans, it was their job to quell any revolt before it started, right? So this is a charged atmosphere in which he's being asked these questions. Let me pause there and see if you have any comments, questions so far.
Don't the mainline, a lot of the mainline churches have a different order for the commandments, but yet most all of them put that as first?
The 10 Commandments, you mean, Diana?
Uh-huh. Are they the same? It seems to me when I learned them as a child, they're a little different order than what I see them now.
No, I think they're largely the same. And I think maybe the scandal behind that 4th question was, rabbi, teacher, you claim to be an interpreter of our Bible. Do you trust it all as God's word to us, or do you have favorite parts? And if you have favorite parts, will it line up with the favorite parts of the law for these various groups, right? Who are you going to side with? Whose team are you on? I think that may have been part of the scandal, kind of behind the question. But he answers no. But the table of the law is the first half roughly is about what we owe to God, and the second half of the table is largely sort of about relationships and how we love each other. So his 2 answers, what's the greatest commandment? He gives 2: love the Lord your God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's Jesus' way of summarizing both those parts of the 10 Commandments. So he's a good teacher in the sense that he doesn't expect you to remember it all. He gives you a little memory device for trying to get most of it. Yeah, other thoughts, questions at this point? I don't know if this is interesting to you or not. I thought we might just take a minute and talk about a few of these groups. And this, I don't know, you know. So you've got various kinds of religious authorities. They're all Jews, by the way. So we are reading a gospel about Jews. When there are Romans, it will be clear we're dealing with Romans or Gentiles or pagans, whatever you want to call them. But in these stories, they are all some version of Jewish people, just occupying different places in the social order, in the economic order, and the different political alignments. So in the verse previous to where we started reading, you have a note about scribes or teachers of the law. So those are your Bible experts, kind of your legal scholars. They knew the language as well. So they're interpreters, kind of technical interpreters of the law, right? And sometimes they try to get Jesus hung up on this or that point. But the groups, the adversarial groups mentioned in our reading were the Pharisees, okay? First of all, the Pharisees should, you know, strike you as familiar punching bags in the Gospels, right? These guys can't catch a break. They are always portrayed as Jesus' opponents in the Gospels. Just be aware of that, and maybe, you know, so there have been times in sermons where I have purposely taken the side of the Pharisees, because that's what makes a passage interesting, right? It's always assumed that they, you know, had the worst of intentions. I'm not sure that's true. The Pharisees were a reform movement. So they were a movement within ancient Judaism towards piety, you know, faithfulness, a stricter adherence to God's laws. So, you know, you might think about our own culture. There are always renewal efforts or reform efforts that we've kind of gotten too loose. We've gotten away from our roots. We've sort of drifted away from what's important. And here's this renewal movement calling people back to a stricter, more faithful sort of adherence to the good news as we've received it, right? So that's Pharisees. So, you know, we can talk more about that. They're all over the place. I mean, so they appear all through all the Gospels. And we're talking about Gospels, but obviously in Paul's writing, in the letters, and in other associates of Paul, there are some Jewish groups who are portrayed pretty negatively, to the extent that as Christians, we need to deal in a very serious way with anti-Semitic ways of reading the Bible. We need to be very careful in how we talk about how Jews are portrayed in all of our texts, because they've all been used at various times throughout history to justify ill treatment of Jewish people. So we do want to be careful. So you got Pharisees, you got Herodians, right? So Luke doesn't mention the Herodians. He just mentions some people were sent to spy on Jesus and trick him, doesn't name them. But Mark has Pharisees and Herodians. We don't know that much about Herodians. They are not mentioned as a group outside the New Testament, which is a bit weird. Most groups you come across in the Gospels, you find references to them in ancient historians, you know. You don't with the Herodians. It doesn't mean they didn't exist. It just means, I don't know what it means. But so Herodians, they were connected to Herod in some way, Herod Antipas, the local governor, right? It seems that they were supportive of Herod, that they were connected to Herod, so they were pro-Rome Jews. So why would that be interesting? Why would it be interesting that they are part of this, you know, adversarial conversation? Well, if they earn their livelihoods from from the taxation, right, of Jews by Rome, and were paid by Herod, and partly were paid for making sure that other Jews paid their taxes, they'd be real interested in a tax conversation. They'd be very interested if this roving, healing, provocative Messiah came to the temple and started saying that Jews should start another revolt by not paying their taxes to the emperor, right? They'd be very interested in hearing that. But that's a bit of conjecture because we don't know that much about them. They don't appear that often in the Gospels or elsewhere in the New Testament. And then it's not in our passage. In the very next passage about the question about whose wife will this 7 times married woman be in the resurrection, that's asked by the Sadducees. So the Sadducees, I think, I mean, this is a bit of a comic strip version, but I think they're the frat boys, the country club set. They are part of the aristocracy. They're well educated. They enjoyed considerable social status. And that's interesting because so many of the Jewish people would have been abjectly poor. So the Sadducees would not necessarily have been so empathetic to the various causes and political campaigns of poorer Jews because they weren't poor. And they didn't believe in the resurrection, we're told. In fact, Mark says that. That claim, the Sadducees were committed to reading the Pentateuch well. So the first 5 books of what we call the First Testament or the Hebrew Bible. They thought that was sort of the heart of God's gift to the Jewish people as the written law. And the Sadducees' claim was that nowhere in those first 5 books do you have any claims or stories or teaching about the afterlife. There's no resurrection stories there. It's creation, it's fall, the flood, it's the calling of Abraham, they get down into Egypt, slavery, God delivers them into their own land, into the promised land, Joshua, So that's the story of the Pentateuch, and there's no afterlife stories there, right? So that's one side of it. But you also have this economic angle, right? If you are comfortable, if you are privileged, if you benefit from the way things are set up, if you like the rules of the game, right? You're not all that motivated to hope for justice in another world. You're doing pretty well now, and you really don't dream about the tables being flipped, right? If you're poor, you do in fact dream about a great reversal, about the last becoming first and the first becoming last, right? That's hope and inspiring if you're poor. If you're rich, it sounds threatening. To Tracy's point, for all of us middle-class people, right, hearing these stories, right, there is a bit of there's a threat for us, right? And sort of, am I walking forward into this new world with enough carefulness about my resources? I mean, that just is there, and it should make us uncomfortable. So anyway, just a few words about some of the opponents. Thoughts, questions there. I don't know what else to say in terms of how that colors this particular passage. It happens to be the Pharisees and the Herodians that come with this specific question. Do you take it to be a serious question? Jane, you were saying maybe not. Maybe it doesn't sound like all that real of a question to you.
Well, it feels like, I tell you what it feels like. It feels like a political debate where, you ask the question, you already kind of think what, these different candidates, how they're going to answer. And if you're up there on that stage with him, you're waiting on the guy next to you to answer in the way you think he's going to answer. Then you're going to turn around and say, aha, I knew you were going to say that. I mean, and that's the sense that I meant. they don't feel like they really wonder what he thinks. I would assume they think they already knew. And so when they were amazed, I have always wondered if they thought, well, dang it, that's not what we thought he was going to say. So now we don't know what to say. You know, maybe he didn't fall into their trap the way they wanted him to, or.
Mhm. Yes, I like that way of reading the story. I mean, one way of reading it would be to say they thought they were smoking him out in front
Yeah.
of other people. That there were some who thought he was another revolutionary, that he was going to lead another rebellion, hooked to refusing to pay these oppressive taxes, which we haven't even gotten to that part yet. But I mean, let me just say it now. The tax we're talking about, should we pay tax to Caesar or not? These are not taxes paid by Roman citizens. This is a special tax levied on just Jewish people as a subject people to the empire, right? They didn't have status as citizens. They're owned in a way by the empire, right? And so maybe Jane, some of them thought that they would force him to admit what he was up to, that he would say, no, we shouldn't pay these stinking tax, to these violent overlords. The world doesn't belong to them. I've been talking about God's kingdom all along. Now's the time, right? And then they arrest him.
I always thought that's what
Mm-hmm.
they wanted the outcome to be.
Mm-hmm. And so let me go back to share that screen then so we can be looking at it here. So let's see. So let's look at how it goes. So what happens? Should we pay them these taxes? Should we not? Knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, why are you putting me to test? Bring me the coin, bring me a denarius. We know that coin's worth about a day's wage for a laborer. So don't think penny, think a silver coin worth whatever, 120 bucks or something like that in our terms. So a currency, right? Worth something. And he says, bring me the denarius coin. Let me see it. They brought one. He says, whose head is on it, whose title? So one question to think about is what is he doing? What's he up to? What's the function of the way he responds? Is he hiding something? They answered, it's the emperor's head, the emperor's image, and the emperor's title. Jesus said to them, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. So is he a revolutionary or is he not?
Not in the sense they wanted him to be
Mm-hmm.
or expected him to be.
Yeah, it's hard to hear. It's his action is, symbolically ambiguous. Maybe we're asking what it all means. Maybe everyone standing around took it in different ways. Who knows? So the coin had the Caesar's, the emperor's image on it, and the let me get the right wording for the inscription. So the inscription on the denarius, it would have said, oh, I'm not finding where I wrote this down. But it's something like Augustus, son of the, or Caesar, or the son of the divine Augustus. So son of the divine one, so son of God is part of the inscription on the denarius, which is part of what causes the problem for the maybe not all revolutionary Jews, but for Jews who felt like participating in the Roman economy, being forced to use coins that called the emperor son of God, was idolatrous and blasphemous. So you were betraying your own loyalty to the God who delivered you from Egypt, right? By even participating in this economy. That was some of them felt that way. And so in a way they were asking Jesus, is this idolatrous to use this coin, and to pay this tax? But Colleen's right. I mean, Jesus said, the first thing he says is, give to the emperor what belongs to the emperor. Now, he doesn't tell you what that means, but the question is about taxation, right?
Mhm.
So it sounds conservative, let's be honest. It sounds like Jesus is siding with the status quo. Look, he's the one in charge. It's the Roman Empire. We're subjects. Pay your tax. Give to the emperor what belongs to the emperor, right?
And because this one does bother me, because how should we take it? Because the taxation is absolutely a big part of what oppressed those people.
Mhm.
I mean, if he's going to line up with the oppressed, which every other place it looks like that's what he's doing. I mean, if they keep having to pay this, then there's no way to get out from under these people.
Right. And keep in mind all the stories, all the parables about debt that Jesus tells,
Mhm.
right? Same point that Jane's making, that getting yourself in debt was a problem for everyone, right? The landowner rented you the land and expected certain payment, but they had ways of, it never quite worked for you, so they doubled down on your debt, and you wound up, indebted to your eyeballs, losing everything and paying more and more to rent your land, and on and on. So the financial plight of the poor was a huge sort of undercurrent to Jesus' whole ministry. Okay. But then the next part of it is, and give to God the things that are God's. So now what?
And what are those?
He doesn't say. So why didn't he say more than that? And what does he mean by that? What do you think?
To make us think, just like he does with all his other parables and stories. To make us think.
It gives me the feeling that the money isn't important.
Again.
Yeah, I mean, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. The things that are God's are going to be more important. So I just think it's another way of saying the money's not important, even though, gosh, it was to them. But he's just trying to, I don't know. That's how it seems to me.
Yeah. It does set up sort of a dual loyalty, right? He recognizes that we're all going to live with multiple loyalties. There's going to be a certain kind of civic loyalty that is just part of ordinary life. And then there's this other loyalty, right? And remember, he said, seek first God's kingdom. So, right, your first allegiance has to be to this new kingdom of compassionate, sacrificial love. That has to be your largest loyalty. And so make sure you give to God what belongs to God. And he's been talking about the image, whose image is on it, which raises questions about sort of, if we're all created in God's image, sort of that marks every human creature with dignity. Is this a sort of a backhanded way of saying any governmental system, any taxation system that sort of degrades the dignity of people is ruled out? I don't know. We're trying to read between the lines. But it does, and we've talked about this before, it does interest me that Jesus was comfortable, and the gospel writers, right, who composed these narratives for us, they're comfortable leaving us uncomfortable. They are comfortable leaving us with the responsibility of sort of working this out and not spoon feeding us the answers That's fascinating.
And that's why we need the stories.
I think that's why we need the stories. Couple things I'll give you here just before we close. This is from a New Testament scholar, and I thought this was an interesting quote. The New Testament cannot be trusted to give a fair picture either of Jews or of pagans. It was written by converts seeking to demonstrate the superiority of their new life by contrast to both groups.
Hmm.
I think that's compelling. I think that's right. So we have to read
Wow.
with a grain of salt. If Colleen has a terrible grudge match with her neighbor, she just hated her neighbor her whole life, her neighbors made her life miserable, and then I read, some short stories Colleen's written, and her neighbor appears in those stories, I might want to keep in mind that Colleen doesn't have the greatest relationship with her neighbor, right? So that it might be colored by her view of her neighbor. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. And then the other thing, and this is a paraphrase because I heard this and I wrote it down hastily, but Henry Louis Gates has this new series on PBS about the Black church. Has anyone seen it yet? It's a 2-part series. I think you can just go to PBS's website. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm dying to. It's gotten great reviews. It's a history about the power of the Black church as an institution. In being interviewed about that series, Henry Louis Gates said, Black people never had the luxury of being apolitical. Our lives have always been a fight for justice, freedom, and dignity. I thought that was fascinating, and because I heard it in the context of reading Mark's gospel, and I think it's hard for us American Christians to talk about our political commitments, and we wish there could be this nice division between our religious commitments and our political commitments, but I do think that's a bit of a white privileged luxury, right? Because if you're Black and poor and American, or any one of those, or a woman, or gay, or anything else, right? Your life just is a fight for dignity and justice. It would never dawn on you that you could just coast and float easily within the way the laws are. And so maybe that gives us a bit of a perspective on sort of ancient Jewish culture, right? Trying to fight for freedom, for liberation, for dignity, justice, and Jesus' role in that, and then our role, right, as disciples, sort of where are our loyalties and our commitments, our advocacy efforts, as we try to grow and deepen ourselves as Jesus' disciples. So, okay, other thoughts, comments, questions?
You still haven't
The
told us
name
what the answer is.
The answer about paying your taxes?
Yes.
Here's the answer. Not only pay yours, Jane, but pay mine too.
Okay.
How about that?
I'll tell Craig to add that.
Yeah,
the
you
next
tell
time he
Craig
gets
that,
Okay.
it's like where you get coffee and you say, I'm gonna get the person behind me.
Yeah.
Colleen, what were you gonna say?
The documentary is titled The Black Church.
The Black Church. And I think if you just go
Okay.
to pbs.org, I think they're spotlighting it all over the place. And I think you can just view it on the website. It's probably also somewhere on a streaming service. I'm not sure. But maybe we
Okay.
could talk about that in the future. So, okay, I got to run to another meeting. Good to see you all. Have a
Okay.
great week. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jared.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.